Hey, welcome back. Today, we're talking about something that's been making waves in international politics, and honestly, it's got people divided. When Trump and Zelensky faced off in Washington, it wasn't just another diplomatic meeting. It turned into a moment that could shape the future of Ukraine, U.S. foreign policy, and maybe even global stability. And this wasn't just about a minerals deal or aid agreements. It was about power, security, and how the world handles conflicts like the war in Ukraine. On one side, Trump is saying Ukraine needs to negotiate for peace, that America has already given enough, and that it's time to put U.S. interests first. On the other, Zelensky is saying this isn't just Ukraine's fight, that Russia has no intention of stopping, and that the U.S. needs to stand firm in its commitments. So who's right? Who's making the smarter move here? Well, let's break it down. And if you find topics like this important, consider subscribing. It helps out a lot and keeps these discussions going. All right, let's start with what actually happened. On February 28th, 2025, Zelensky arrived in Washington for a scheduled meeting with Trump. The plan? Finalize a minerals agreement, something that would give the U.S. a stake in Ukraine's natural resources in exchange for continued support. But tensions were already running high before they even sat down. Trump had recently signaled a shift in U.S. policy, voting against a UN resolution condemning Russian aggression. That move alone set off alarms in Kyiv. Zelensky, meanwhile, came with one goal: to get stronger security guarantees from the U.S. to help push back against Russia. But instead of diplomacy, the meeting turned into a public confrontation. Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance accused Zelensky of not being grateful enough for the aid Ukraine had already received. Zelensky pushed back, saying the U.S. needed to commit more, not less, if they wanted to contain Russia. And by the end, Trump canceled the planned signing ceremony, sent Zelensky away, and left Ukraine with nothing new to rely on. So, why did Trump take this stance? Well, his argument is pretty straightforward. First, he believes Ukraine should negotiate for peace, even if that means giving up territory to Russia. He's been vocal about this for a while, saying that dragging the war on only increases the risk of a larger global conflict. Second, he's focusing on putting America first. His administration has repeatedly said that U.S. taxpayers shouldn't have to keep funding foreign wars, especially when there's no clear endgame. The message is clear: Ukraine needs to figure out how to stand on its own. And finally, Trump and Vance made the argument that continuing to resist Russia without compromise is basically gambling with World War III. They see Zelensky's insistence on more military aid as reckless, pushing the West closer to a conflict they don't want. And honestly, there's a big group of people who agree with that. They see Trump's stance as pragmatic, a way to get America out of an endless foreign entanglement. His supporters argue that if he were a Democrat, he'd be praised as a peacemaker. But here's the other side of it. Zelensky's perspective is completely different because for him, this isn't a game of political strategy. It's about survival. Ukraine has been fighting for over 3 years, and without Western support, it's not just a tough battle, it's an unwinnable one. So, he came to Washington looking for clear assurances, because without U.S. backing, Ukraine is left in a dangerously weak position. And from his view, negotiating peace with Russia isn't even an option. Russia has broken past agreements before, so why would this time be any different? He's arguing that any deal without strong security guarantees is just setting Ukraine up for failure. And then there's the bigger picture. Zelensky isn't just thinking about Ukraine. He's saying that if Russia wins here, they won't stop. Other countries in Europe could be next, and if the U.S. backs off now, it sends a message that aggression works. And a lot of world leaders agree with him. After the Oval Office showdown, European allies like France, Germany, and the UK publicly backed Ukraine, warning that Trump's approach could weaken NATO and embolden Putin. So where does that leave us? Well, the fallout from this meeting has been massive. In the US, there's been a sharp divide, even among Republicans. Speaker Mike Johnson suggested Ukraine might need a new leader, one who's willing to negotiate on Trump's terms. But others, like Senator James Lankford, pushed back, saying the U.S. should stay committed to its allies. Democrats, on the other hand, condemned Trump's handling of the situation. Senator Bernie Sanders called the idea of pushing Zelensky out horrific, saying Ukraine is fighting for democracy against an authoritarian invasion. Meanwhile, over in Russia, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Russian officials mocked Zelensky and celebrated Trump's reluctance to commit to Ukraine's defense. And that's where a lot of the concern comes in. Analysts are worried this signals a weakening of Western unity, which could give Putin more confidence to push forward. So who is right? Well, that depends on what you value most. If you think the priority should be to avoid escalating the war and reducing U.S. involvement, then Trump's stance makes sense. He's saying America has given enough and that it's time to focus on peace, even if that means Ukraine has to make tough compromises. But if you believe that standing up to authoritarian aggression is the only way to prevent future conflicts, then Zelensky's position is stronger. He sees this as more than just a regional war. He sees it as part of a larger global struggle where backing down now could set a dangerous precedent. And beyond the moral argument, there's also a practical one. If the U.S. really does cut support, what happens next? Does Ukraine have the ability to hold off Russia without American aid? And if they don't, what message does that send to other countries watching this unfold? And that's what makes this moment so defining. It's not just about a disagreement between two leaders. It's about the future of U.S. foreign policy, the balance of power in Europe, and whether the West is still willing to stand up to aggression. So what do you think? Should the U.S. step back and push Ukraine toward peace talks? Or should they keep supporting Zelensky to hold the line against Russia? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, thanks for watching. If you found this discussion interesting, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow, and I'd love to keep these conversations going with you. See you in the next one.